You want to live life to the fullest till you're 120 or more, dance at your great-great-grandchildren's wedding, travel, and feel good till the very last moment. And that's not the life most people are living now. What we try to do is free up more testosterone by having the body make more of its own using peptides, which is a field of my research. Overusing testosterone to the tune of 10 or 100 times what our body needs can be dangerous because you can overgrow muscle.
Our guest today is Dr. Florence Comite. She's a clinician scientist and an innovator in the field of precision medicine. She trained at the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, as well, and actually founded Women's Health at Yale. Let's dive into this conversation with the one and only Dr. Florence Comite. So you have a vast education in endocrinology, in reproductive endocrinology. Can you talk to us first and foremost about how our sex drive can be indicative of our health?
Great question. There's a lot that can be indicative of health. So sex drive is about a healthy system, particularly the way the brain interacts with the ovaries or the testes in men and in women. And as we age, there's a fall in those hormones. So hormonal optimization helps our sex drive. And what men see, which is actually interesting as they hit their 30s and beyond, is while sexual desire can drop, sexual erections and maintaining erections is all variable. So you can see men with any one of those three kind of falling, declining, but not all of them sometimes. And it's really the power of the mind that also can drive sexual desire, because a lot of the hormones begin to be triggered from the hypothalamus and pituitary in the brain. So sex drive is an important factor of being alive and functioning well.
Amazing. All right. So since you brought up erections, let's talk about it a little bit more. So is there any outward information about an erection that could give us some insight into our health and even possibly our testosterone? Is that some kind of a potential outer biomarker that we can look at?
That's a great question, because yes, it starts to dissipate as men get older, but one of the signs of health is having an erection in the morning when you wake up. Now sometimes it's because you have to go to the bathroom, you have to pee, but for most men, it's a sign of their ability to function. It declines with age, which begins in the 30s, because that's when our hormones begin declining. Testosterone falls by 1% to 3% a year in men and women in the 30s, and that affects sexual function. But interestingly enough, in my studies and thousands of men and women, the major complaint is energy. Sex drive is not always. I think there's a force, mind-body force, that drives sex drive in a way. Funny to say it that way, but energy tends to fall off first. That's what I noticed when people would talk about their health.
Fascinating. So I'm so glad that you brought up the part of the mind in this whole equation, because I think we get so focused on just the physical aspect. And we're going to talk about all these pieces, but I want to dig in a little bit more, because this is something, as you already mentioned, that we see gradually as we age. But you've also, in your work, have shown very clearly that there are some people that can be older than what their driver's license might say, and some people can be younger than what their driver's license might say. And I'm not talking about getting a fake ID, but what does that mean for everybody?
It means that there are several ages. One age is chronological age, the candles you blow out, the birth date you were born. The other age that's far more important is your biological age. And we've done some very deep work looking at what happens to your DNA and aging when you go from each decade of life to the next. And people can hold on to being younger, not forever, because getting older generally means we're declining. That's a fact of life that we can reverse, though. We can keep our health for the rest of our life with some very simple initial approaches. And just winding it back to the mind-body, my approach really looks at each human as a system, as a unique system. And as we talked about before, I have an identical twin. And so I knew that things began even in utero. We differentiate. Even once the egg and sperm split and we go to different parts of the uterus, we're born in unique ways. And so we're not exactly alike. We look so much alike that people mix us up. But there are lots of things that are different about us. So the mind and body is one to me. The spirit's in there too.
We've got to talk about this because, again, you have firsthand experience of being an identical twin. And here you are saying that we're not the same. But unfortunately, the public sees that as, you guys are literally identical is the word.
Yes.
It's tied to it and not looking at the differences. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, I think what needs to be understood is that we're gifted with genes. Half of our genes come from our mother. And I'm talking now about genes, not, blue jeans.
Not Jordache.
And half is from the father. But what happens uniquely in each of us is the choices we make and the way our genes turn on and off with switches, something called epigenetics, can make expression of genes variable from one person to the next. And that's what I saw over 20 years ago and led me to start studying why people are different. I don't think genes at the time were well developed enough. So I started with metabolism, hormones, lifestyle. And I think of it as each person having their own health story, not a chief complaint where you go in. To me, when you have a chief complaint, your disease is well underway because it's been cooking for 20, 30 years. You can see diabetes in little children. You can see heart disease. In fact, we know that young men who came back from Vietnam had stenosis already in their arteries when they came back and underwent autopsy because they were gone. And that's what led us to study the changes that happen very young in life. And now that we're living a longer life, keeping that all together is critical.
So that advanced cardiac issue, is that from stress as a big component?
Stress is a factor, but genetics is probably the underlying driver, but the way you live your life can change the way your genes express. So one of the aspects that you'll see in my book, Keep It Up, is that your genes don't have to be your destiny. And I think a lot of folks think they just are going to turn into their mother or father, and it isn't inevitable. If you take control in simple ways so you can also enjoy life, because I believe in that very strongly. You want to live life to the fullest till you're 120 or more, dance at your great-great-grandchildren's wedding, and go skiing or snowboarding if that's your choice, travel, and feel good till the very last moment. And that's not the life most people are living now.
Yes. Of course, one of the things we talk about is the combination of lifespan and health span, right? In our culture, for years, we see that we're living longer. We've had this advanced age, but recently that is reversed, of course, as you know. But it's not just about how long you live, it's the quality of those years. And for many people in our society today, we're not necessarily living longer, we're dying longer. We're just kind of extending suffering.
That's well said. You're exactly right. And if you just look at the statistics, 4 in 10 Americans as they age get at least 2 chronic diseases. The very popular diseases like diabetes, Alzheimer's, lung cancer, kidney disease, heart disease, stroke. 6 in 10 have at least 1. But in my way of looking at, through my lens, you are brewing those diseases under the surface at the cellular level for decades. You don't just show up one day with diabetes or a heart attack. There's been changes that evolve over the decades that can be stopped anywhere along that path and reversed. And that's what we do.
Now, I've got a special connection with the identical twins and, the health outcomes. I'm from St. Louis, and some researchers there have this huge data set looking at identical twins and seeing this firsthand. I've been studying this for years, and I'm so excited to talk to you about this. But for example, 2, again, identical twins being in the same environment, same behaviors essentially, but one child ending up with obesity and one not. And one of the things that the researchers identified was differences in their microbiome, for example, and seeing a higher ratio of firmicutes in one twin, and then seeing a higher incidence of insulin resistance and whatever that the case might be. So even the genes of the bacteria potentially playing a role here as well. So not to mention, you already shared something so profound, which is we might share the same genes, but these epigenetic controllers are going to influence how things are getting expressed. Is that correct?
No, you said that well. I'll use my twin and I as an example. We grew up in the same home. We were fed similar food, but even as a child, I liked liver. My sister didn't. My mother didn't. So she didn't have to eat liver, whereas I didn't like lamb at the time, and my sister loved it. So I negotiated my own deal. If she doesn't have to eat liver, I don't have to eat lamb. So why? Why do we have different taste buds? I love sushi and sashimi. I can live on it. My sister doesn't like fish. She's an amazing gardener. I'm not. And when you speak about the microbiome, it's one part of our whole system. In fact, if you look at the data, 99% of us is not human genes. There are other genes that we've incorporated. There are others like bugs, beyond bacteria and viruses even, and funguses. And they're everywhere in our body. They're even in our eyes, in our brain. We don't quite know yet exactly how they influence disease, but there's a lot of work going on to say, can we change the nature of disease, whether it's diabetes or heart disease or neurological decline, by changing the microbiome both in the GI tract and on the skin and elsewhere.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think we tend to get a little bit of tunnel vision and get latched onto the things that we do know in science. There's so much that we don't know. So you just mentioned, we've identified bacteria and viruses and archaea. There's so much as far as like microbes that we don't know. We have no idea about. And it's cool that we're learning this stuff. But, what you're doing right now is you're helping us to stack conditions and help us to kind of control the controllables a little bit better. And so this is an exciting time because we're also looking at what we can do to age more healthfully. And so if you could, can you share some of the biomarkers that we all can maybe start to look for that can give us an indication about how well we're aging?
Absolutely. And just to, wrap up on microbiome to a little degree, the microbiome that lives in our gut is responsible for absorbing nutrients. When somebody has a condition called celiac, which can be genetic, it can mess up their immune system and their microbiome system is affected. You can get osteoporosis, for example, because you don't absorb the right kind of nutrients you need to sustain bone, right? So when we look at biomarkers, and this work I started over 20 years ago now, there are certain biomarkers that I've seen over the last couple of decades that are absolutely, their relationship, what they are, absolutely dictate what's going on at a deeper level. And those are 5 important biomarkers. Although we draw a lot more, right now we're looking at using these 5 to be able to help people make good decisions about extending their health span to match their lifespan. And that is a critical aspect because we're living longer lives. Like a lot of folks are now living beyond 100, but actually you said it well, we're actually dying longer. And that's no fun. And it's a burden on the individual, the family, our country. It'll be a burden on our children and grandchildren because they'll have to support the aging humans. And so the biomarkers that I find the most useful include looking at carbohydrate function, so fasting sugar, fasting insulin, which is almost never mentioned, hemoglobin A1C, which is an average of how your glucose behaves over the past 3 months, free testosterone, not total, but free, because total is bound up in the body in lots of proteins and isn't available to act. And the last one we look at is something called cholesterol risk ratio, which takes the cholesterol pattern, lipid pattern, total cholesterol, the LDL, the HDL, the bad, the good, as people like to call them, and looks at the ratio. And that ratio is also indicative of how you will age and what we could do to change that.
All right, let's start at the end with the cholesterol. You said very intentionally, I know, what people like to say as good and bad cholesterol. Why did you say it like that?
Because that's just not enough. That's the surface condition, and we can't always tell what's going on under the surface. So it's very important to know how those molecules break down. You can have a pretty high good cholesterol, quote unquote, HDL, but if you don't have alpha 1 and alpha 2 in the HDL, then you're not protecting yourself. You can also look great for most of your life as a woman, for example, and then you hit menopause and perimenopause, and all bets are off because your bad cholesterol can start climbing because it's intimately tied to estrogen. So we look beneath the surface at the genetics of your cholesterol, other markers like LP little a, which is a genetic marker you inherit. And even if your cholesterol looks beautiful on the outside, the values I mentioned, if you have LP little a, you're at much higher risk, and something has to be done about that. So those dig even deeper into somebody's system.
Amazing. So even with the quote bad cholesterol, it's playing a role in the body. And
Definitely.
looking at it in isolation, I think might be a mistake.
Everything in isolation is a mistake. That's the way conventional medicine is practiced. And I speak with experience because I'm trained very classically at Yale. I was in several departments, all relating to growth, development, and hormones and endocrinology. Pediatrics, I started my work in pediatrics at the NIH, where I did research looking at rapid development, something called precocious puberty, slow growth, a constitutional delay. And that went on to women's health, which I started at Yale in the 90s, and then men's health. Because I had such good luck with women, their significant others started coming to me if they had a partner. And now we just see everybody. And so looking at the way the body changes influences what happens with cholesterol over time. And that's data you can get in your children now, and you can change the course of their future health trajectory, meaning how will they feel, how will they live life, instead of waiting for disease to emerge and then jumping all over it. That's what conventional medicine is. It's a fix-it kind of society instead of proactively stopping emergent disease.
Yeah, which seems very logical, you know. But also you mentioned how, and I don't think we think about this a lot, when we see the manifestation of a thing, it's oftentimes years, sometimes decades in the making. You know, we see just the cardiac event, we see the diagnosis of diabetes, we see the diagnosis of, dementia, whatever the case might be. But there are certain things happening years in advance. And if we can identify those things, hopefully we can stave off or even prevent those things from happening later on.
Said well, yes. And that can even pertain to like 3 children in one family. They can all be different and be on different tracks, from the genes they inherited, the choices they make starting as little children, even if they all live in the same home. If one works out and the other one really doesn't. We've seen more men than women, who never put on muscle as teenagers, and this is probably genetic. They were known as geeks. They were the last one chosen to be on the baseball team or soccer or football. And so they retreated, and most of them didn't work out and didn't try to protect their body because it wasn't really well known. Even today it isn't. And as they age, they've lost the ability to put on muscle easily, where that's something that's not a difficult thing to do for most men and women in their 20s to 30. At 30 and beyond, it begins to change because our bodies begin to evolve.
Something that I recently have been talking about is intramuscular fat, and having a higher amount of that, making it more difficult to actually gain muscle. So that's what we're talking about with somebody who might be skinny fat, for example, growing up and not really using your muscles. And then it does actually, unfortunately, get harder later on down the line. But it's not impossible. The great thing about your work is that it's not impossible to make these improvements or make some improvements. But let's start now. The sooner you start, the easier it's going to be later on.
You've captured exactly the way we think, in that every person we see, because it's about that unique person. We call it the N of 1. Most research in conventional medicine is based on population research, and I'm happy to share the papers with you that speak to this. And now there's been a shout out to do N of 1 research. In fact, NIH has a program called joinallofus.org. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a great program. Anyone can sign up. They're looking for diversity, and you can get free testing, everything including your genome, and then learn what that means, because they know there's diversity. So they're looking for 1 million lives. I signed up the minute Obama announced it in 2015, because I knew this was the beginning of understanding that we can't base on regression to the mean or averages, because right now the way we treat people tends to be one size fits all. But I believe very strongly, and it started with being a twin, that it has to be unique to that individual, which is N of 1. And you have to capture the data for that one human being to help them make decisions and give them the wisdom, not just the knowledge, but interpreting that knowledge by connecting the dots integrating it with the way you live life. Do you sleep? How well? Do you work out? Do you not? When you work out, do you do high intensity interval training? Do you do resistance? All of that is critically important.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Another thing, this should be common sense integrated into medicine now. There's to have a blanket treatment for anything without paying attention to the person can be dangerous, let alone ineffective. And so I'm a big proponent of finding out about yourself and also working with a practitioner that can help to cater things to you because you're unique. We're so unique. We're so different. And there are similarities. There are some certain tenets that hold true. And like you've even shared some of these biomarkers we can pay attention to, but your numbers are going to be different from other people and all the other cofactors. Nothing. You're not going to find a puzzle that's the same as somebody else's.
I can give you a couple of stories, and I could look at your labs and tell you what's going on, what we think of biomarkers, because it's evident to us. But you're absolutely right. And for example, when we started Grok Health, which is an app that we intend to scale to everyone, because everyone should own the knowledge and then the wisdom to make changes so they can direct their whole life and have the force and the health span to live a life in great shape, whether it's till 120 or 150. And so if you look at some of these numbers, like the 5 biomarkers I mentioned, the very first couple of folks that we looked at, I didn't know anything about them. I was testing a virtual system because I believe we need to service people virtually. There are not enough clinicians and doctors to take care of everybody, particularly in a sick society that we have, right? And one of the first people I looked at, his biomarkers were he was only 33. His biomarkers were indicative of a man in his 50s. And I looked because we collect a little bit. It takes about 10 minutes on the app to fill in, questions about your personal history, your family history, how you live life, whether you exercise, what's your energy like, what's your sex life like in men and women. And I looked at this and I saw that he wrote that his father had heart attacks and strokes, had no idea if his father was alive or not. And he had been diagnosed for 10 years with high cholesterol and high blood pressure. And the physicians he was seeing, smart guy, told him, we'll keep an eye on it, because they thought he was too young to do anything about it. Not correct. And I went to him because I had the opportunity, since it was a beta and we were just starting. And I said, so how's your father? He told me his father died at 60. And his numbers were indicative of early death. And there's a whole profile of folks like him. Even in the first 100 people, there were about 10% of them had these findings. And they had a certain background. So we can look at that and say, you start paying attention at 2025. And if you have a child, let's start from the beginning, not even wait till they're 20 or 25 to protect their health. And so we are now able to profile people in a good way, to be able to give them the tools they need to make those changes. Within a couple of months, he's a new man. He's ripped. He feels much better. He had just gotten married. His libido was low. He was putting on weight around the middle, and he was an athlete. He rides on a scooter to work every day in New York. And so it's really a wonderful thing to feel like you've given people a gift of good health, and they can own it. And that's what we're doing.
Amazing. Yeah. Another one of those biomarkers, you specifically said free testosterone.
I did.
Can you talk about why free testosterone?
I certainly can. So most hormones in the body are bound up in proteins. There's another protein you may hear of called sex steroid binding globulin. And it can vary dramatically. In women on birth control pills, it can be sky high. And what happens is it binds a lot of the hormones. To stick to testosterone, it causes the testosterone to become inactive, because once it's bound, it's not free to act at receptors, whether it's muscle, brain. Testosterone contributes to memory and cognition. The heart, think of the heart, it's a muscle. Bone, that's why men have thicker bones for a little bit longer, about 10 years longer than women. Women get loss of bone and early fractures of their wrist called Colles fractures. Men get them about 10 years later. So in we women, it starts in our late 40s and 50s. We go on to hip fractures, then spine collapse, so we shrink. We have kyphosis. You've seen people walk around with walkers and they're bent like a U. They can't straighten out. In men, they catch up pretty readily. 25% of men and women through aging will have severe osteoporosis. Again, completely reversible. You can actually stop it. There are great drugs. So I'm somebody who believes in supplements and medication. I think of them on the same spectrum. I think of medication as a drug that a company put a lot of money into, so they charge a lot for it. But there are supplements that act just like medication, and sometimes they're better than prescription medication. And so if you look at ways you could stop that change, what we try to do is free up more testosterone by having the body make more of its own using peptides, which is a field of my work. My research was focused largely on peptides, even in little children.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about that? What are peptides?
So peptides are simple hormones that can act in the body the way our naturally secreting messengers from endocrine glands, whether it's the brain, the hypothalamus, the area of the brain called the arcuate nucleus, secretes hormones and stimulates and peptides, which are just pure proteins. They're not steroids. So, and they stimulate another part of the brain called the pituitary, which you might know of as the third eye, but really isn't the controlling agent. The controlling agent is the hypothalamus at a higher point. Have you heard of the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus? Of
course, yeah.
So, food, desire, sexual function. Yeah. And so we use a peptide actually in men to stimulate their own natural secretion of testosterone. Because in my research, and this I published in 2013, it's actually referenced in the book, in 260 men, what we found out is when their testosterone drops, the brain just ignores it. Instead of that negative feedback loop where the body should recognize that you have too little testosterone, and it does in your 20s and in your teens, and all of a sudden it ramps up testosterone from stimulating the brain. The brain says there's not enough circulating, you need more. And it doesn't. It stops doing that effectively in men beginning in their 30s. And then every decade of life, men fall out into what we call andropause. And they go through a change just like women, but we women hit a wall mostly in our 40s. At 50, most women are in menopause, where men can go on every decade of life and some of them still can make their own testosterone, not as effectively. So we want that free testosterone because you could have a very high total testosterone, but a very low free testosterone if it's bound up, if there's certain agents you make in the liver that sequester it, if you have too much body fat, not muscle. So that's a very important piece. At some point, men need testosterone, and we use it, and that's a steroid hormone, but there's a time factor, and each male, again, is unique. I've seen men who can be on the peptide we use, which is called human chorionic gonadotropin, for decades. We've had men into their 80s. And then other men, by the time they're 40, 45, they need testosterone. They can't make their own. And there's all sorts of data that we look at to determine that and how a man responds.
Wow. Again, just paying attention to the person.
Exactly.
What a concept.
Yeah. N of one, where that unique person needs to know what he or she needs to do to keep their health for life. That health span should match your lifespan.
Yeah. All right. So if you could, you mentioned birth control in that tie-in with testosterone. I don't think a lot of people think about something like that. What are some of the things that might be knocking our testosterone down unknowingly? Is birth control one of those things?
In women, it's essential. So this isn't well known because testosterone isn't approved formally for women. We can use it as physicians if we show that there's not enough testosterone. In fact, it reminds me of a recent case of a woman who just had a second baby a couple of years ago and took a look at her numbers, and all her hormones were very low. And her sex steroid binding globulin was very high. It was over 200. And we like to see that more like in the 30s or 40s. She didn't tell us yet because she's in the Grok app and it takes time to accumulate that information. We don't want to bombard people with questions, so it takes 10 or 15 minutes to sign in. And afterwards you get more questions as we go on to prescribe. And I sent back a message to her in the app and said, "Are you taking birth control?" And she said, "How did you know?" Because her testosterone was negligible. It was less than 1. And in women, we have far less testosterone than men. We'd like to look at a free testosterone of at least 6. And she wasn't even registering. It was under 1. And her estradiol was also completely suppressed. So birth control in young women in their 20s and 30s, There's some good aspects of it, but the negative is it suppresses testosterone. It's actually a great diagnostic test for diabetes because you can have a woman who keeps herself in great shape, who eats well and works out and sleeps well, and yet she doesn't know why she's putting on weight. And it isn't the estrogen or the hormone, it's the sex steroid binding globulin that's tying up all her hormones. And that's why free hormones are so necessary. So a lot of times we're seeing the projected future of diabetes and heart disease and stroke because we get the family history, which is like a mini genetic test. It's even better than genetics because it's what diseases express in your family. And so we look at all those various aspects as we dig deeper. So the Comite Center does it in a bespoke way. But my dream has always been, going back to starting this work, if I could prove that we reverse disease after identifying it, detecting it, you don't go down the path of being a diabetic or having a heart attack or getting Alzheimer's, then I felt that this should be owned by everybody. It was too good to keep it just for people where they could afford it. And, that is a difficult thing to do in medicine.
Wow. It's just so fascinating that, we have to, when it comes to something like testosterone, that input, we're paying a lot more attention. There's more rules around that. But birth control is getting passed out like candy, essentially. Like if you got skin issues, a lot of people are getting some prescribed birth control pills. I had no idea that.
All you need to do is ask your doctor if this is a go-to, because I know your listeners love you. They trust you. So I know by being here, they're going to hear this. Ask your OBGYN, obstetrics gynecologist, or your internist to measure free testosterone and sex steroid binding globulin. And if it's lower, if your free testosterone is lower than 6, it's likely your sex steroid binding globulin is too high. And you need to be given a cream. There's also other ways to take it, but I like creams for women. You just put it behind your knee or in the fossa of your elbow. It's absorbed nicely. It doesn't increase hair growth. It actually makes you feel stronger. You put on muscle and you lose fat. So it's a no-brainer. And there's no downside to it. We don't like to say that 100%, but testosterone also spares, cancer cells. Testosterone and progesterone, which women make when they ovulate. And we now know helps people who have fatigue and can't sleep. Progesterone's a good way to think about it. In men, their testosterone should be free testosterone should be about 180 to 250. And again, because every male is different, you clearly have muscles, you've clearly worked out, you're an athlete, I can see it. But some men have a build that's more what we think of as ectomorph. They're lean and thin, and they're runners, or they're soccer players, or they're tennis players. And that's fine, that's who they are. You don't want to overburden them with muscle, because too much muscle is hard for the heart sometimes. So we have men who've had heart attacks at a pretty young age. We want to balance. We've had my trainer, one of the first people I treated in New York beginning in 2008, Livingston, great guy. He came to me one morning and he said, Doc, I've been getting to NYU several times because I keep passing out on the golf course. They think I'm dehydrated, and I don't know why. He's basically from Jamaica. So my first question was, because the story is so important about a human being, you have to connect to the human, you have to find out how they've lived and what their family is like. And I said, so who in your family, knowing it's rampant in Jamaica, has diabetes? And the answer was everyone. But because he kept himself in such good shape, and he was very muscle-bound, he was actually gorgeous. His picture was in Penn Station when they were advertising this gym that he was at, hanging up, huge, like the length of that wall there. And now he looks completely different because he does TRX, he does different kind of training, and he's made his body change, so he's protected his heart, because when he came in and he wasn't even 50 yet, he had a silent heart attack because underlying what he was dealing with was diabetes. And nobody made the diagnosis because a lot of times when you have diabetes, you don't feel pain in the same way as other people do. It's quiet.
It's fascinating stuff. All right. So just to circle back really quickly with the birth control piece. And again, I don't think we realize oftentimes, unfortunately, this is something that is influencing not just an isolated hormone, but it's going to inherently affect what other hormones are doing. And yes, we can add another piece to the puzzle and also potentially find some other alternatives for your birth control too. And I don't also, in this conversation about testosterone, this is just one of the things that we might not realize is influencing testosterone. And you mentioned another one just really briefly, which was sleep. So how does our sleep influence testosterone?
So sleep to me is paramount. When I started this work over 20 years ago, the order of interest I thought was going to be first exercise, then nutrition, then sleep. And I've completely flipped it. It's sleep, nutrition, and exercise. And then restorative practices like meditation, where you can turn off cortisol, the stress hormone, if you really meditate effectively. So the gene doesn't turn on. And they've done lots of studies, Harvard, University of Wisconsin, to show that. And that's really important. Sleep is so vital that when you deprive people of sleep, and you even do it in a research setting, which has been done, you speed up the clock, or you get jet lag, or people who are shift workers or flight attendants, they get diabetes much earlier. They have infertility. So testosterone and all the other hormones are critical, because during sleep, our body recharges. Our immune system changes. Our hormonal secretions change. One of the things I like to advise people to do is not eat for 2 or 3 hours before they go to sleep, because by doing that, they're shutting down the system. They're actually changing the way hormones are released. And we see it all the time because we use continuous glucose monitors. I'm actually wearing one on my arm. I wear it all the time because I am a geek, and I'm a geek who did exercise when I was young, because my father wouldn't. He was my inspiration, so he taught us everything from basketball to ice skating when I was little, and so I'm lucky about that. And so the data speaks to us. In fact, we just got a message from one of our clients. We call them clients at the Comite Center because we don't want them to be sick patients, right? I wouldn't say that in an academic center because I get my head handed to me. And if you try customers, that's a whole different level. And the question was, my sugar's falling really low in the middle of the night. It's waking me up. And it turns out that this particular person, who's very much engaged in his health, he was finishing his mealtime dinner at 7 p.m., going to sleep about 5 hours later, and his body needs to eat. We've also looked at his genetics and his telomeres, and it turns out that he can't fast. It doesn't do anything for him on a positive note or a negative note. Now, there are lots of us who can fast. I can fast for days and not feel it. But since each of us is unique, he needed to have a snack that had protein in it a couple of hours before going to bed, and that won't interfere with what happens. There's so many other aspects of sleep. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Matthew Walker, but he has a lot of expertise around sleep. He's written quite a bit. But it's complex. Sleep is very complex, and I think it's the most critical issue in America today, that we don't get enough sleep, that we don't sleep effectively. So I believe very strongly in monitoring, and I'm hoping to be able to make an Aura or a Whoops or a Garmin available, and sleep is the predominant area because we overlook it, yet we can really fix people if they can sleep. I even have a story about myself about that. But I don't want to leave the topic of birth control pills for a second, because there's some good in it. There's some data that shows that women on birth control pills, and there are many versions of birth control. So you're right, there are lots of alternatives. You don't have to do the pills. But if we just focus on the pills for now, which is mainly estrogen and progesterone, or progesterone alone, not testosterone, right? A lot of people in medicine think women don't need testosterone when we need it very badly, So there's always risk benefit. And the way I approach a human being trained at NIH and Yale, and I had brilliant mentors, is to think of the risk benefit. If by taking an aspirin you reduce your risk of a heart attack because you have slippery platelets, there might be a chance that you have a bleed. But if you take a small dose of aspirin, like a baby aspirin or 2, then you might mitigate against a bleed but protect your heart. So you can walk a fine line if you know the data about yourself below the surface.
Yeah, it's got to be dependent on you.
Exactly.
And your goals.
And that would make a difference in how you feel.
Yeah. This risk-benefit analysis, if we can just use that simple thing, because there's so much out here in the world. We live at a very interesting time. There's a plethora of different foods, supplements, drugs, and we've got to look at what is it, and also understand there's no free lunch. Everything has a cost to it, and being able to balance, mitigate, even with exercise, there's a point, as you already alluded to, where this can be a problem, and so, but that doesn't mean that you don't do anything, right? So it's finding that right thing for you where you are right now. And that's probably going to change too. So this is why it's great to know these biomarkers. And, you mentioned sleep being that top tier thing for you. That's phenomenal. Like, I hope we all get that. With your level of expertise, for you to say that is so powerful. And you said
I think it's powerful from anybody, but thank you for the compliment. Just had another client who was in yesterday, who's been longstanding, interesting story. We diagnosed Lynch syndrome in him, actually, and his mother recently died at only 70 of breast cancer. And because of that, in his 40s, he now looks like he's 25. That's another benefit of what we do. So he's reversed aging dramatically. And but he was telling me that he's now making sure he's cold through the night. So there are products, and I don't know if you mentioned them, that can keep certain people who need to sleep when it's cold, because we probably, that's how we evolved from caveman times. There was no heater to turn up at night. It probably doesn't do much people good to be very warm during the middle of the night. And that there's been a lot of work on that's ongoing. And he was showing me on his Oura Ring, because I know his data, he was the kind of person who would get no deep sleep. He could sleep for 9 hours and he'd get 9 minutes of deep sleep. I could sleep for 4 hours and it's just about all deep sleep. So I'm lucky in some ways. I give up REM. Everybody, again, has their own pattern, but you have to look for it. And I think there are great ways to do that. And so if you can search for that and you have the wherewithal to do these kind of self-evaluations, being guided in some ways by the wisdom of your clinicians, a combination of people, think of it, on your team, that's the way to go. Because then you have specific, direct, guidelines for what the choices you make. You may choose to eat that chocolate bar, even if it's a milk chocolate bar and it's really sugar. And that's fine. You can make that choice. Do you want to live on chocolate every single day? Well, I do, but I try to do dark chocolate because it's really good for you. It's very high in flavonols and it's good for my system selectively. But when someone likes milk chocolate or white chocolate, you're really just getting sugar. And so, yeah, you can have it, but don't have it all the time. Make balanced choices.
Yeah, you're not Willy Wonka.
No.
So even with that, just to tie this all together, testosterone is obviously important for all of us.
Yes.
This shouldn't be this kind of dichotomous conversation
In
anymore.
physiological amounts. Let me be clear. Overusing testosterone to the tune of 10 or 100 times what our body needs can be dangerous, because you can overgrow muscle. So if you've seen, people in the gym who do it on their own, and they usually look fabulous and they're in great shape, they have a pot belly sometimes. Their organs have overgrown because many of them might use growth hormone, which I'm all for if you need it. But we use also other peptides like CJC 1295 and miperelin that stimulate the same axis as growth hormone does. And it's synergistic, meaning it's working in sync. It's not a good thing. A lot of very, deeply involved trainers die at a young age, like by 50. It's not unusual. Their hearts can burst. And what you're seeing in their pot belly sometimes is not fat. It's overgrowth of organs like the liver and the spleen. So there's a balancing act that needs to be finely tuned. You should not do what your best friends are doing necessarily, because you're not them. And equally, it has to be defined for who you are. And that is difficult because, as I said, most advice that comes out is, I've done this, so you should all do it. This is the program you should follow. And it's very hard to do that because even doctors don't know this, and they've gone to school for many years. You have to learn from the inside out what's going on in a human being.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. It just seems so logical. And if anything, we could lean on finding ways to optimize our sleep, which I want to ask you about in a moment. And you mentioned it being essentially like a charging station when we go to sleep.
That's a great way to say it.
And filling up.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we're all Teslas walking around here and we're
I have
charging.
one that my husband calls the Stressler because he hates it. He has a BMW that he's always loved. And I love the Tesla. But
this is an ad for one side and then but this thing is we're kind of connecting to that charging station within ourselves.
And that's a great way to put it. I may steal that line. I love it.
There was a study that was published in JAMA in 2011, and it was looking at young men, and they had them come into the lab and they sleep deprived them for a week. And they made them get just 5 hours of sleep. And this was, again, just a week-long study. And then they tracked their sex hormones, and they found their testosterone dropped by about 15% just in 1 week. And that might not sound like a lot, but the researchers equated that to suddenly being 20 years older. And again, this is what can happen in just a week. And for me, it's just like, how many times was I operating on somewhat that same amount of sleep when I was that age? Like, I would literally, and not all the time, but a few times I would leave the club and like the sun is out, and then I'd go to work from there, just like really abusing myself. And the thing is, when we're younger, we think we can, quote, get away with it.
Right.
But
burn
what
the
we're
candle
doing,
at both ends.
we're accelerating our aging process. We're accelerating the time to having some kind of disease onset because we're not following basic tenets of health, like getting quality sleep. So you mentioned sleeping in a cool environment. Is there anything else? Because even earlier you mentioned how our mind is an influential part of our sexual function. What about with sleep? A lot of people, one of the reasons they have trouble sleeping is their mind is just, they go to bed and it's just like, now it's time to remember all the shit that I need to do.
Right. Totally. Your example of how you burn the candles at both ends reminds me of a study from a couple of years ago where they said, well, when men become fathers, their testosterone automatically drops. So you have to be careful of everything you read. And that's the first thing I learned at Yale when I was an intern and studying as a medical student. One of my wise attendings said, because in those days we'd go to the library and read everything we could. You didn't really get it fed to you. And I'd stay up all night and read stuff, right? To be able to present and sound cogent in the morning, like I really knew what I was talking about when I really didn't. And I remember him saying, don't believe everything you read. So when you read research and you see it reported in the media, just for all your listeners who trust you, do not believe it. They have to publish papers, so a lot of times there's overstatements. And so you have to read the original paper to really understand what that means. And I know you're interested in that. But I'll use myself as an example before I go to what are the kind of low-hanging fruit for sleep. I mentioned in passing that I studied myself a lot because clinical researchers, people that study people, tend to try things on themselves first because they want a deeper understanding, right? You do it? The same thing.
I've been a guinea pig many, many times.
Me too. And so there was a period of the last 6 months of 2021 when I was building a Palo Alto with my team. They're fantastic. We usually travel with about 10 of us. And I decided to do plasmapheresis because I have a lot of interest in young blood for old blood, but I don't like the notion of getting blood from other people. I think it's something that, is there a way to clean our blood? So I did it for 3 months in a row, and I was testing myself every month. In fact, I lost a lot of iron because I was giving up a lot of blood. And within 3 months, my biological age dropped by 15 years. 15 years, because I was measuring it with a particular test we do that looks at DNA. I've actually published in that during COVID as well. So then I stopped sleeping because I was developing the app, and it was so important to me to do it that if I got 4 hours a night, and I love to sleep, I can sleep 8 or 10. I'm one of those people that can sleep. If I got 4 hours, that was a good night because I would just work into the night because the daytime was too busy, right? My age not only went beyond 15, I still did it. I did the plasmapheresis, which exchanged whole blood, and they cleaned the plasma, and they gave me back my red blood cells. And my age skyrocketed back up beyond my chronological age. So sleep is vital. And what most people don't maybe understand is the behaviors they have at night. That's the simplest thing to do. So if you're watching TV, if you're reading if you're working on your computer, if you're on your phone and you're posting things on Instagram and social media, stop all of that. Try to turn down the volume around you and quiet down and read an old-fashioned book or listen to quiet music or take a bath. A bath is an amazing agent for change, or even a shower, but make it warm because it brings out serotonin. Now, there are certain foods you can also eat, like turkey, warm turkey. Hence, everybody falls asleep after Thanksgiving dinner, right? And anything that stimulates serotonin. Warm milk, if you can tolerate it. I couldn't really. I would have to have hot chocolate with a lot of milk if I did that. But baths work amazingly well. and use things like Epsom salt. You can absorb the magnesium. And if your magnesium runs low, that's one way of increasing magnesium in your body, by taking a bath and putting Epsom salt, which is fabulous to feel better because it relaxes the muscles, it reduces cramping. Some people get that at night. And then we have other options. So if you are somebody who puts your health at risk because you cannot sleep, and there's data for that, then there are certain agents, both valerian root, supplement type agents, ashwagandha. Yes, is a fabulous way.
Kava.
All
just
of those.
Even chamomile.
Exactly. Chamomile tea is a wonderful way. Then sometimes we escalate it if people are still having issues, and we can use trazodone, which is a very old-fashioned medication, but we find it really works well for people who get up in the middle of the night and don't know why. When they're light and they start ruminating, it prevents them from really arising. And some people, when I treat them over the years, even if we do many interventions, which we do, I can't take away their trazodone. And so they just love it because they finally are sleeping, which is very frustrating for most people. And then there are versions of sleeping pills and peptides that we use. So peptides that mimic growth hormone, like imiperilin, which I mentioned, or CJC 1295, can produce very deep sleep in most people. I actually use it with a combination of BCP 157, which we call prime body protection, because I had a stem cell procedure on my knee. I overstretched and tore my ACL and my medial meniscus doing yoga, of all things.
Interesting.
I'm active.
Trying to relax.
Trying to relax. First I did PT, and then I searched, and we use a lot of specific clinicians that I love. So there's a doctor who has great skill at stem cells, because I did this a few years ago. And we treat people as they age. You need to make more stem cells. So we have a protocol, and he tests our client stem cells before he does procedures. We have the highest level of stem cells, so we have great outcomes in people who do stem cell procedures of their knee, their back, their hip, their Achilles. And the kind of tear I had was classic to do surgery. And I didn't want to remove a cartridge because I believe in the future we'll regrow cartridge. So that's what I did with stem cells.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right, you've mentioned so many incredible resources that people now have access to, and they have access to you in many ways. Can you let people know how they can get more information, where they can get some insight on some personalized medicine for themselves, and just to get more information from you overall?
So the Comite Center is a bespoke system, so it's quite intense and expensive. And one of my dreams was to make this information available and to have it grow. So we've launched the GROQ app, GROQ. I don't know if you know that word, but I'm happy to define it.
Please do.
It comes out of the science fiction literature. One of my favorite books as a child, because I always felt that I lived in the future, was Robert Heinlein, who wrote a book called Stranger in a Strange Land. I don't know if you've ever seen that book or you'd like to see it. I'm happy to send you a copy. But that's where the word GROQ comes from. And it means understanding with empathy and intuition. And I feel that that's what we need to come back to. And the Comite Center has recreated the old-fashioned family doctor because we care about whole clans and we know them well. We typically don't market in a way that's classical. It was all word of mouth. When people did well, they told everybody. So that's how it grows. What I really think is going to be reachable is the GROQ app, GROQ, and you can sign up on a wait list. We're not quite ready to open it up in a big way. We already have thousands of people on a wait list, but we have to be able to develop it even further. It's very helpful, and actually I met a man today because we were seeing clients and GROQ people coming from 2 companies. So we're now working with 2 companies who are signing up the folks in their companies to use GROQ, and at a lower cost. It's still not inexpensive. So my dream is to bring it down as much as we can and to have support through strategic partnerships in the future. But right now we're looking at growing the GROQ app so it's available for everyone. So even just uploading some questions about how you live life, your family history, what your energy is, what your sex life is like, what your men's health and women's health, depending on where you come from, and if you're non-binary, that too. We can help guide you just from that information, because the data that you have on yourself can give us insight into how your body is functioning at the cellular level before symptoms actually emerge.
So where can we get access to the Grok app?
Right now, you go to Grok Health, GROQ health.com, and you can register on the wait list. And ultimately, I'm hoping within the next year, we'll be able to open it up so people can join it and sign up to use the app in a regular way.
Awesome.
And also, you can follow me if you want on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. So you can follow me at Comite Center and at Florence Comite.
Can you spell that?
My name?
The
Both.
Comite.
Comite. C-O, C like cat, O like Oklahoma, M like Mary, I like Isaac, T like Tom, E like Echo.
Awesome. Follow her right now. And of course, we can't wait to get access to Grok. It's something special. And also, you've got some different places where people can actually visit. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'm happy to. Our main headquarters is in Manhattan on Central Park South. And again, they can also go to the website at, it's actually at ComiteMD or www.comiteMD.com. And they can also see us in Palo Alto and Miami Beach.
Awesome. And your book, by the way, is available on
Amazon or Kindle. The name of my book is Keep It Up, The Power of Precision Medicine. And it's started this path it's over 10 years old. I wrote the book. Exactly, it came out in October 2013. And it was the hardest thing I did. And now I'm writing another book to be able to give people the wherewithal and tools to understand that they can take care of themselves with guidance and wisdom.
Awesome. And by the way, so the title is a double entendre. If people don't know that, keep it up. So this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your brilliance. And yeah, wow, this is really amazing. Thank you so much. And by the way, we'll put all of these resources in the show notes for people.
I had a fantastic time, and I'll look forward maybe to coming back or reversing it, where we can talk and you can tell me all about what you've accomplished and how come you're such a trusted voice on podcast number 1, I think, in health.
And don't forget about the muscles.
And the muscles. I remember I mentioned that. You haven't given me enough about that. Send me your labs. I can tell you what's going on.
It's already done.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It's been awesome. Dr. Florence Comite, everybody. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
It's been information withheld from us for a very long time, and it is behind so much frustration, misunderstandings, and the orgasm gap, which is it's a big abyss that not even the world's greatest daredevil could jump it.